On March 9, 2009, a missing person case was opened in Spokane County, Washington. 14 months later, it was closed. No arrest, no body, no explanation in the public record. This is the file that wasn't supposed to stay open, and the one that never should have closed. Susan Powell was reported missing on December 7, 2009. Her husband, Joshua Powell, told police he had taken their 2 young sons camping in the middle of a winter night. When he returned home the following afternoon, Susan was gone. The investigation that followed would span multiple counties, involve dozens of search warrants, and generate thousands of pages of documents. But no charges were ever filed in Susan's disappearance. Then, on February 5, 2012, Joshua Powell killed himself and his 2 sons in a deliberately set house fire during a supervised visit in Graham, Washington. The case was closed 6 months later. What makes this case unusual is not the tragedy. It's what the closure itself revealed about the limits of evidence, the structure of criminal investigation, and the difference between knowing what happened and being able to prove it. Because according to investigators, they believed they knew what happened to Susan Powell. They just couldn't close the file the way the system required. Susan Powell was last seen at her home in West Valley City, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. She attended church services that morning with her 2 sons, Charles and Braden, ages 4 and 2. Neighbors reported seeing her return home in the early afternoon. That evening, according to later testimony from the children, the family was together in the house. By the following evening, Susan was gone. Joshua Powell called Susan's workplace shortly after 5 p.m. to report that she had not shown up for her shift. He told coworkers he didn't know where she was. Later that evening, West Valley City Police conducted a welfare check at the Powell home. Joshua Powell answered the door and told officers he had taken his sons on a spontaneous camping trip to the West Desert, roughly 80 miles from their home, the previous night. He said he assumed Susan had gone to work. Officers noted the house was cold. 2 fans were running, pointed at a wet spot on the living room carpet. Susan Powell was reported missing that night. Search teams deployed to the area Joshua Powell described, the West Desert in December. Overnight temperatures below freezing. No evidence of a campsite was found. Phone records later showed Joshua's cell phone had pinged off towers near the town of Ely, Nevada, roughly 150 miles south of the location he'd provided to police. He was asked about the discrepancy. He said he may have been confused about where he went. A search warrant executed at the Powell home produced several items of interest: a wet-dry vacuum with damp upholstery, cleaning supplies, a handwritten life insurance document signed by Susan, naming Joshua as the sole beneficiary. Investigators noted it was dated days before her disappearance. Susan's purse, wallet, and cell phone were still in the home. Her car was in the garage. Forensic analysis of the wet carpet found traces of Susan's blood. Not enough to indicate a fatal injury at that location, but enough to suggest she had been injured there. Joshua Powell was named a person of interest. He was never named a suspect. Among Susan's belongings, investigators found a handwritten journal. In multiple entries from 2008 and 2009, she described feeling unsafe in her marriage. She wrote that if anything happened to her, it would not be an accident. She named Joshua Powell. The journal was entered into evidence. It was not admissible in a criminal trial under Utah law at the time, because it constituted hearsay. Unless Susan could testify to its contents, she could not. West Valley City Police, the FBI, and volunteer search teams conducted multiple searches of abandoned mines in remote areas across Utah and Nevada. More than 50 locations were examined. Susan Powell was not found. In August 2011, cadaver dogs alerted to the scent of human remains at an abandoned mine shaft in Topaz Mountain, Utah. The mine was excavated. No remains were recovered. Search efforts continued intermittently through 2011, but no significant evidence was located. In September 2011, Susan's parents, Charles and Judy Cox, were granted temporary custody of the two Powell children. A court had determined that Joshua Powell's living situation, which included his father, Stephen Powell, was not suitable. Stephen Powell had been arrested on charges of voyeurism and child pornography. He was later convicted and sentenced to prison. Joshua Powell was allowed supervised visitation with his sons. On February 5, 2012, during one of those visits, a social worker brought Charles and Braden to Joshua Powell's rental home in Graham, Washington. The boys ran inside. Joshua Powell locked the door behind them. The social worker called 911. She reported smelling gasoline. Before police arrived, the house exploded. Joshua Powell had struck both children with a hatchet before igniting the fire. All three died. On August 23, 2012, the West Valley City Police Department officially closed the Susan Powell case. In a press conference, police stated they believed Joshua Powell had killed Susan and that he was the only suspect in her disappearance. They also stated that due to his death, no charges could be filed. The case was classified as closed, exceptional clearance. This is a designation used when investigators believe they have identified the person responsible for a crime, but prosecution is not possible. No cause of death was listed for Susan Powell. No location of remains. The file contains an answer that cannot be recorded as fact. There are gaps in the file that remain unexplained. Why did Joshua Powell drive 150 miles into Nevada on a night he claimed to be camping with his sons in Utah? What was disposed of during that drive? The area he traveled through is vast, remote, and largely unsearched. There is no record of what, if anything, was found along that route. The Susan Powell case is closed in the legal sense. But closure in an investigation is not the same as resolution. It is an administrative decision. A file moved from active to inactive. A determination that no further action can be taken under the current system. Susan Powell has not been found. No trial ever took place. The only person investigators believed could answer what happened died without ever being charged. This is what it looks like when a case is solved, but not finished. When the file is closed, but the folder remains unfound. If you followed a case where the investigation stopped, but the questions didn't, leave the name in the comments. We read everyone. This is the Unfound Folder. We don't solve cases. We open the files that were never meant to stay closed.